All right, so we were doing this hanging sign question, and while that was uploading, I just moved it over to another page where I could make it bigger. So the question on the sheet itself asked you to find the tension, which we did. So we picked our pivot point back here. That canceled out the force that the house was putting on it. So we had three other torques. It canceled out, the torque of the house was putting on it. So we had three other torques. Two of them were at angles of 90 degrees, so their signs went to 1. That would be the two weights. The torque one didn't have a sign of 90, it had a sign of 30, so it stayed. We got a tension of 206.1. So then the part B of the question would say, what is this force that the house or the pole or whatever the beam is attached to is pushing on the pole, the beam with? Okay, and the easiest way to find this is to do some of the forces in the X and some of the forces in the Y. So if you look at all these forces, now that I don't have 30 seconds to do this question, but 10 minutes, I can go slower, you will see that probably the force of the house has an X component, and definitely the force of tension has an X component. And that's it. The two weights don't. So when we do some of the forces in the X, we'll have Ftx and we'll have Fhx has to equal 0. One way is positive, one way is negative. It really doesn't matter which one you call positive, which one you call negative, because in the end, they're just going to be equal to each other. And that means we can find Fhx, because it's going to be equal to Ft, and the x component is cos theta for t. Fhx then is equal to 206.01 newtons cos of 30. And earlier I was saying, don't change this into Fh cos theta, because my fear would be you'd think that that theta is the theta of the tension, and it isn't, and we don't know what it is. So it's safer to just leave it as Fhx, and you can find this value, and when you do, you should get 178.40989934 for those of you that like lots of decimals. Okay, so that's the x component. Then we would go in the y direction, some of the forces in the y. This sign hopefully is not moving in the y either, so that will be 0. And so in the y direction, there's an x component or y component that the house is putting on the beam. I'm guessing that it's up, but I might be wrong. But just leave it as is, and if it works out to be negative, it means it's down. Okay? The tension, x component, y component, is also going up, so it would be plus Fty, but the two weights of the beam and of the sign, they're both going down. So we're trying to get F of the y component of F of the house. So take the other three over. The two weights, m of the beam g and m of the sign g, will become positive, and the y component of tension, which is your sign, will be negative. Fill in your numbers. M of the beam was 3 kilograms times 9.81 meters per second squared. M of the sign was 9 kilograms times 9.81 meters per second squared, and then it'll be minus 206.01 newtons sine of 30. And when you do this, it actually does work out to be positive, and it's fairly tiny. It's 14.715 newtons. So when I say fairly tiny, I mean in connection to the Fx, which was 178. So if you want the Fh, so you need to draw your components. So Fx, Fhx, will be 178.40989934, etc. And the y will be like this big, 14.715 newtons. And so your resultant Fh will be here. And so remember earlier I said, because I'm old, I know it's really hard to have the house push out with a totally horizontal force. There's always going to be at least a little upward component, okay? And it is tiny, but it's still there. And you know how to find them, square them, add them together, take the square root, and you should get an FH to be 179.0157. That's why I kept all my digits, because I knew this 14 wasn't going to make a huge difference when we squared it and added it to the 178 squared. It's 0.13, so I'm going to stop there. But then you also need an angle. So I would do tan, inverse tan of the 14.715 over the 178. And you should get an itsy bitsy angle of 4.715 degrees. Which way? That is counterclockwise. So CCW beam. Okay? And that would be your answer to part B. And now it's time for you to try some questions. So I'd like you to go back to page 501 and do number 33. And the sheet that I gave you, front side, I'd like you to do numbers 1 to 4. Okay, so 5. This one's a hanging sign. These ones are all teeter-totters. So 1 to 4 should be easy, even if you get frustrated with the hanging sign. All right, very good.